previous video, we examined the sentence level questions, including how to identify and solve the simplify sentence and insert sentence questions. In this, our final video of the series, we will explore the last type of questions, read to learn, while reviewing some of the major concepts discussed in this series. So, we will be looking at the final question types, the read to learn number 9, select summary information, and number 10, complete schematic tables. Now, on the test sample that we have from the TOEFL Quick Prep download, we really only have one question type to examine. So we're actually just going to look at one of the question types. As you will see, both are fairly similar in their execution. So there really is no need to look, very carefully at the other type of question. So, as we mentioned before, the read to learn questions are the last questions you will see with each reading passage. Now, these are new to the TOEFL test itself, compared to the old written version and the computer-based test. And generally, they're worth the most points out of all the other question types. Now, unlike the other questions, the read to learn questions involve the entire reading passage. So that means looking at the overall text rather than just a particular detail, sentence, or even paragraph. Another difference is that the read to learn questions don't involve just choosing one answer from a list of multiple choices. Instead, you must manipulate your answer choices using your mouse. Now again, as we mentioned, this can be done in two ways. Placing information in a schematic table, or organizing information to summarize the main ideas of the whole reading passage. And please note that there's usually only one read to learn question with each reading passage. Now, on the sample we're given, we've mentioned before that question 14 is the read to learn. So, first off, you will notice immediately from the language that we're given that this is the summary chart question. You'll notice here the keywords brief summary. So let's try to kind of highlight some information here that might be of interest. First off, you have to choose 3 answer choices, and this is pretty standard for both read to learn question types. And they have to express the most important ideas. Now, some sentences, as they say, don't belong in the summary because they express ideas that are either not presented or are considered minor. And again, minor ideas are usually referring to either details or some specific fact in the passage. And then notice they do make a point to say that it is worth 2 points. And I'm not going to necessarily say that I understand the TOEFL scoring system exactly, but clearly this is an indication that the question is worth more. Now, in our sample here, they ask you to write your answer choices in the spaces. On the test itself, you will see that you can use your mouse. Now, first off, this is kind of how it looks in the sample. On the test, you will see the actual chart listed here with the 3 bullet points ready for you to manipulate information. Now, at the top here, you will notice they give you kind of a thesis already. That it was a highly developed city and it reached its peak during this time. So it's pretty interesting that by the time you get to this last question, pretty much all of this has already been discussed, but it's helpful to know that this is essentially the thesis of the article. Now the key here is to remember that on the test you would use your mouse to move the answer choices. You would actually click and drag them into the chart. But in this particular case, we're going to look at the answer choices and just discuss which ones we think are the correct answer. Now, the first thing we need to recognize is that trick discussed in the instructions. So the idea here is that some of the information might be true, but are not necessarily the main idea. So that's something that's a little hard to understand. Most of the time we're looking for answers that that there's only one true answer, with the exception of the negative detail question. So, again, as we stated in the instructions, though, the goal here is that you have to find the main ideas of the entire passage. So first off, there is more than one right answer, and of course, we could look at other pieces of information that also could be true. So how exactly do we do this? Well, first off, we have to find answer choices that are broad enough to include just more than a fact or a detail. A lot of that has to do with how the question is worded, looking at its language. Now, what I've done here just for the moment is we've put the answer choices on the left side, and we're going to examine each answer choice one by one. Of course, it's also pretty much, kind of keep in mind, when we're looking at these answer choices, we have to look for specific language cues. So, as we mentioned here, inclusive language. Inclusive language would be language that's kind of a little more expansive. It has more opportunities, kind of grouping information. So, for example, you might see keywords such as in many ways or a number of ideas. So notice the ideas, we're looking for kind of groups of information. Now, don't forget, of course, that there could be answer choices that may also contain incorrect information, or information that might be possible but not actually mentioned. So, of course, this is always a standard TOEFL trick, so we can't forget that as well. So as we're looking at each answer choice one by one, let's look at how the particular questions are worded, and if we think that they themselves are expansive enough. So let's look at each one. The first one, the number and sophistication of the architectural, administrative, commercial, and religious features of Teotihuacan indicate the existence of centralized planning and control. Now, first off, we have to answer, is this in fact actually correct or true? And the answer is it is. The text spent a lot of time talking about this centralized planning and the centralized control of its civilization. But the bigger part of it's actually located in the first part of the answer choice. The architectural, administrative, commercial, and religious features, these were all again mentioned in the text, and they're all fairly expansive. In other words, instead of just mentioning one of these, the answer choice mentions all of these. So that pretty much tells us that this information is probably going to be one of the answer choices because it is expansive enough. So over here on the left side, you'll notice with the color blue, we're going to keep that one for now. All right, let's look at B. Teotihuacan may have developed its own specific local religion as the result of the cultural advances made possible by the city's great prosperity. Now, first off, we do know that religion was mentioned in the text. However, it's the only thing mentioned here in this answer choice. In fact, it's just one single detail. And we're not even quite sure if it itself was a result of the cultural advances or if the religion helped create a lot of the prosperity. So this one might also be somewhat, maybe somewhat incorrect or a little confused in its organization. But the truth is it mentions only religion, which the text itself is more than just religion. So again, this is something to keep in mind. This information is mentioned, and perhaps it might be true, may not be. But if it is true, the key here is does it represent a main idea? Is it expansive enough to talk about everything we've seen in the text? And I think at this point the answer choice is no. So we're going to eliminate B as well. We're going to eliminate B. All right, now let's look at C. And its answer choices. Again, notice right away it starts off with expansive language. Several factors. So that's a good sign. May account for Teotihuacan's extraordinary development, which of course was extraordinary. Its location, certainly talking about its location. Its natural resources, it does spend a lot of time talking about the obsidian mine. Potential for irrigation, their intelligent elite, and finally the misfortune of rival communities. Now notice again we're using kind of synonymous language, but basically synonyms, that's kind of the nature of them, is they don't necessarily have to be the specific details themselves. They can be kind of big. So in this case, misfortune, of course, was referring to that natural disasters with volcanoes. But the rest of the ideas, again, seem fairly expansive. It's not just one of these ideas. It's actually mentioning several. So in this case, it does look like C contains factually correct information and is also expansive enough to be about the entire passage, not just one detail. So we'll probably keep that one as well. All right, looking at D. Again, notice as a result of its religious shrines. Okay, so in this case, it's talking about that religion perhaps helped drive the growth of Teotihuacan, which does seem, again, this is factually true. But notice, even though it talked about being an influential religious center, the key here is to think about, again, is this reflecting all of the text itself? Or is it just reflecting one particular detail? Well, once again, the same issue we had with B is that it's really talking only about religion. So in this case, this is probably another answer choice that's too minor or too narrow to be about the entire reading passage. So this is probably another one we're going to eliminate. Okay, looking at E. And many important areas. So once again, we've got expansive language included at the beginning. From the obsidian industry to religious tourism, which again is true, and two ideas that are mentioned. There's success and prosperity, which again, the text spent quite a bit of time talking about this. So we can notice that success and prosperity is, again, fairly expansive and open language. So it's not just focusing on one particular detail. And then notice it did refer to the fact that it did kind of provide this sort of feedback, this kind of cycle in which when they increased immigration, for example, it increased their economic potential, which of course provided more immigration, more incentives for immigration. So E looks like it has all of the information we need. So we're going to keep that one. All right, finally, let's look at F. Now, first off, it does mention immigrants. It does mention a time frame that the text did talk about. We do recall from a previous question it talked about coerced labor. But the truth here is that, as we mentioned in a previous video, coerced labor was not necessarily the same as a threat, or not necessarily even the same as punishment. So first off, notice it says in the second part of the question, it discouraged further settlement and limited Teotihuacan's population growth. Well, we actually know this to be completely false, because the truth is immigration grew, and part of it was because of this sort of coercion that the elites in Teotihuacan exhibited. So in this case, F is not only just, again, about a specific point, but it actually misrepresents that information. So in this case, I think we're going to eliminate F as well. So now, looking at our answer choices, the idea here is that looks like A, C, and E are going to be our correct answers. And once again, notice the expansive language that's used. So not only do they include lists of information, not only do they include these kinds of grouping words such as several factors, which again can include lots of different ideas, and talking about important areas, already these answer choices kind of reveal that this kind of inclusive language is what the test is actually looking for. Now, this does bring us to our final points when it comes to strategy for the TOEFL reading section. As we've mentioned before, the test actually is trying to help you, which does seem kind of absurd, but the idea here is that the test is actually designed to help us understand this reading material. So part of this is thinking about what good reading skills involves in the first place. It really involves understanding how to look at information in different ways. So really the idea here is we have to think that the goal of the reading section is so that we gain a deeper understanding of the material. So in fact, can we learn from the material and actually use that knowledge to help answer questions about it? So the thing to keep in mind is by the time you've reached the read to learn question for each reading passage, you probably will have read the text at least 2 times. And that's because all of the questions require you to go back and really examine the information in different ways. So as we said at the beginning of the video series, you have only about 20 minutes to read the passage. However, many students, by the time they get to the read to learn question, they kind of forget that those questions can help as well. So with the read to learn question, the purpose really is to see what you indeed remembered about the entire text. But the truth is, sometimes you really don't understand the text until you've answered questions about it. So the thing to keep in mind is, you might understand the reading even better after you've completed this final read to learn question, which in turn can actually help you go back and make sure that you answer the other questions correctly as well. Especially, of course, if you have the time to do this. But many students forget about this. By the time they get to the read to learn question, they're ready to move on to the next reading passage. But oftentimes what I find as a teacher is that students really don't understand the passage until they've worked with it for a while. So I guess my final kind of suggestion here is don't forget that if you have time, go back and make sure you answered all those questions correctly, because more than likely the read to learn question helped you understand it better. So our final thoughts for question types 9 and 10, the read to learn question. This question requires considering the entire passage and identifying the main ideas by either filling out a schematic table, which we didn't examine in the video, and filling out a summary chart, which we did examine. But you will find that both question types involve answer choices that include main ideas from the text and not just single facts or details. Answer choices that include broad or expansive language that usually includes more than just one point or idea. And of course, answer choices that represent the information correctly. That's always a key. Now, thinking about in the final part of our video here, just looking over the test one more time, just to review some things that we started all the way back in the beginning of this series. Again, each reading passage is about 700 words. And generally, you have 3 to 5 passages on the test, with around 12 to 14 questions per passage. And again, the timing really will depend on how many passages you have. But again, noticing with the math that if you had only 3 reading passages, you would have basically 60 minutes, which again averages out to be about 20 minutes per passage. Again, that's not a lot of time to answer all those questions. Now, something we learned in the one of the previous videos is the idea of how the information is put together on the test. So that concept is what we called cohesion. This is talking about how information fits together. And we said this could be accomplished in many ways, and the TOEFL especially likes to use synonyms or synonymous information to kind of restate or rephrase things. But we also saw that referent words, words that basically can point back to other words or point ahead, and signal words really can illustrate how ideas relate to each other. And of course, they also help give some sort of indication which direction we have to read. Again, we mentioned that on the test, there are 10 basic question types. And throughout the whole video series, we looked at the individual strategies we need to solve each question. So remember, each question type requires a different level of reading. And some of the questions will take more time and others take less. So that's something you'll have to kind of discover as you go along. But clearly those questions that involve more reading, such as the inference questions or detail questions, these are the particular questions you're going to have to spend more time with. So in terms of the strategies we discussed throughout the video series, first we talked a little bit about skimming. And skimming is when we quickly move through the information to get sort of the basic idea of the text. And we notice how the signal words that are being used during this time help kind of give us an idea of the organization. So, for example, if it's a history article, we probably will notice some time signals, for example, being used. And as we stated before in terms of strategy, you might want to skim the text during the first 3 to 5 minutes of your reading passage. That will kind of help you get started before you jump in and start answering questions. Now, we also, though, talked a little bit about reading, but defined reading in a little bit different way. We said that on the test, you need to think of reading as something to be more active about. So we called it active reading. And really, it's a process that's extremely helpful, especially in those sections of the test you find maybe a little more difficult. So, for example, the inference questions. Now, first off, active reading, as we said, involves paraphrasing, or putting things into your own words. That makes it easier for you to understand. Also, we talked about reordering information, to put information in a different order when necessary. So, of course, this isn't always necessary, but sometimes the organization of a passage can be difficult. Finally, we discussed the idea of scanning. And scanning involves looking for information in the text as directed by the question prompt. So, for example, if a particular detail question asks you to look in a specific paragraph and look for the specific piece of information, that process was called scanning. We also discussed a general test strategy, which is basically process of elimination. And process of elimination, or POE, was the systematic way to eliminate answer choices in order to improve our chances of guessing the correct answer. So some things to keep in mind. Remember, don't eliminate answer choices that you don't understand first. If you have 2 answer choices and one you understand and you think is correct, and the other is one you don't understand, then choose the one you do understand. But remember, there is no 100% strategy to guessing the answer. There is no substitute for knowing the answer. That's the key. If you know it, then obviously you know it. But the idea here is that many times students think that as long as they have multiple choices, they can always have a pretty good chance to guess. Well, again, process of elimination is your best opportunity, but it's not 100%. Now, some tricks that we noticed that were common throughout the test, especially involving answer choices or those distractors that have misleading or incorrect information, by putting information in the wrong order and or confusing the facts or details of the passage. We also noticed that one of the tricks the test liked to use was using language that was directly taken from the text, which many times is often used in the wrong way or order. So again, this was usually a trick that we would see. But keep in mind that in the answer choice, especially the correct answer choice, that we often would see synonymous language, not direct language. So this is another trick, so to speak. When we're looking for the answer choice, it's usually going to be the one that says basically the same thing, but in a different way. In terms of preparing for the test, we talked a little bit about the fact that you can study for the test all you like, but really the best way to improve your score and your overall English ability is by increasing your vocabulary, academic and technical vocabulary, and again, looking at signal words. Now, of course, it would also be a good idea to think about what freshmen study at the university level, the types of academic subjects and concepts they have to be responsible for. So you might also want to make sure that you're expanding your reading choices to include more things involved at the freshman level: science, history, psychology, sociology, and so on. Now, some final recommendations. These are kind of common recommendations I give to students when preparing for the test. First off, the key is to think that preparing and taking the TOEFL are basically two different things. So first, let's talk about preparing. Preparing for the test involves learning about the test itself, the requirements and strategies, the design, and of course the level of reading that you need to consider. So some things to think about. In the beginning, when you're preparing for the test, now ideally it would be great if you could start, maybe say 6 months to 1 year before taking the test, but the idea here is to not worry so much about time. At this point, time is not important. It's more important to learn about the test at your own pace so that you can more thoroughly understand it. So that, again, that's the key. We want to make sure we understand all the question types, and hopefully this video series has done a good job doing that for you. Of course, we also have to think about what's going to help us improve our understanding of the test. Well, again, it's not just understanding the test itself, but it's also improving that vocabulary and the overall content knowledge. And of course, I tell students, you also have to incorporate test practice into your everyday routine. Now, you don't have to spend, 6 or 8 hours a day, but you do need to make it something that's automatic, something that you don't even have to think about. You just do it every day. So I often tell students that test prep should become as natural as brushing your teeth. It's something you do and you don't even think about it. Now, taking the test, of course, is a little bit different. As you get closer to the actual time to take the test, only then should you begin to focus on time management and taking practice tests. Sometimes students want to jump in and take a practice test right at the beginning, and unless they're really ready for the test, that's probably not a good idea. So first off, I usually tell students at least 3 months before you need to take maybe some practice tests, maybe even begin timing yourself, and focus on the question types and areas of reading that give you the most difficulty. So you don't necessarily have to spend time focusing on every answer choice, but maybe thinking especially about, again, do I know how to actively read information? Can I understand what an inference question is asking me? Generally about 1 to 2 months before, this is when I would suggest taking practice tests. That way you get an idea of the rhythm of how to take the test, and of course you've been focusing on time. You may be slow at the beginning, but you will get faster naturally. So the idea here is to think about, what is our goal when we're taking practice tests? Well, at this point, your goal is to receive the same or a better score on the real TOEFL test. So when you're taking your practice test, you get a sense as to, what do I actually want to get on the test? This is pretty much going to be what's going to happen to you. It's pretty unlikely that students make dramatic improvements. More than likely, you're going to get the score you've been getting with your practice tests, but hopefully you can do better. So, in wrapping up our video series, I want to remind us one more time that there are lots of great materials out there to help you prepare for the test. I certainly hope the video series has been helpful, but I do think that you need to consider a preparation book, visiting the ETS website, and of course we do have our TOEFL and TOEIC website found at the bottom of the screen. Thanks for watching. Coming soon, our TOEFL listening series.